They took the genetic code and they literally ran with it. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Nadine Speaks. If this is your first time seeing this beautiful face, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button down below. And if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. So glad to see you again. So for this video, I thought I would take a deep dive into Operation Warp Speed. So if you haven't seen my previous video, I'll link it up below. But I kind of went into the different phases of clinical trials, so I thought this next video it would be good to understand what they did for the COVID vaccine and how they basically sped up the whole clinical trial process so that we could get a vaccine as soon as possible, but without risking safety and efficacy. So that's very important because we don't want to start harming people just because we want to get something out fast. But like we've seen with Operation Warp Speed, we have really come together as a whole nation with all the different regulatory agencies and the different funding agencies, and we see all the manufacturing companies coming together to really produce a vaccine in an unprecedented manner. And so first of all, what is Operation Warp Speed? You probably heard that on the news, you probably heard it when Trump announced it, but basically its overall goal was to come up with a vaccine, to develop one, to manufacture it, and to test it out in order to come up with a safe and effective way in preventing COVID-19. Who were the major players in Operation Warp Speed? Well, we really saw all the different regulatory bodies in the United States come together in order to make this happen. The Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, we have the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, then we have the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, and we have the Department of Defense. And so they really all came together and to figure out how we could first of all develop a vaccine, and then second of all, which is really important, is manufacture and distribute it to the most amount of people. And before I start talking about that, I think it's really important to note that in this time and era that we live in, we are very fortunate if you're living in a developed country and a rich country in order to receive these vaccines. But unfortunately, in countries that are not as developed and are not as rich as a country such as the United States or China or Russia or the UK, we're not going to see those people receive the vaccines for a while. And so I think it would be good to highlight that when we're talking about vaccines, we should think about global access, so how it's going to get to the most amount of people around the world. And that's very important because even in this day and age, when it comes to other vaccines such as malaria or hepatitis or TB, we're seeing that just reaching underdeveloped countries. I know that my company in specific works with trying to allocate those vaccines fairly and globally around the world. So that's just one thing we need to think about and be grateful for, that I'm grateful that I live in a developed country where we will see the vaccines being distributed fast. So now let's really dig into Operation Warp Speed. I don't know if you remember, but back in January, China had already released the COVID genetic code. So once the scientists all over around the world received the genetic code, they were really on it. Like the minute that they received the genetic code, they were ready to go. So they received the genetic code in January, and that's where all the major scientists around the world were like, all right, they took the genetic code and they literally ran with it. They tried to find different approaches in order to come up with a vaccine, and we saw that they already had come up with a vaccine by March. So from January to March, they had already in a lab figured out what kind of vaccine that they wanted to test. So from March till now, they've really been going through all the different phases of the clinical trial. Now, if you didn't watch my previous video, I told you that there's different phases of clinical trials testing different things. Well, in Operation Warp Speed, they were able to shorten the clinical trials and kind of overlap them. I'm gonna show a bunch of images here to show you exactly, because there's a really good image that kind of goes through the different phases that the COVID vaccine went through and what each phase's goal was and how they reached that goal. And then a big thing that Warp Speed stressed actually in making the vaccine so readily available after it went through all the phases and testing for safety and efficacy was that behind the scenes they were manufacturing the vaccine already. So they had deals with different manufacturers. A big manufacturer, a big player was this Emergent Biosolutions in the United States, and they really were people who had a big factory where they could manufacture the vaccines at a big level so that they could actually, you know, distribute it over 1 million doses to people, which now we're seeing that all the frontline workers, thank you to God, are receiving the first doses of vaccines, which is really awesome. And I'm so excited that we as a human species got so far. So thank you. Thank you to all those scientists. If you're listening to this, thank you. So really from March, that's when they started the first phase of the clinical trial. So first phase, is it safe? If I put it in someone, is it gonna harm them? And how much do we need to put into someone and how? So this was when they were trying to figure out the dose of the vaccine. And really, this is when they started shelling out all the dough to different players of the vaccine. So there's different people coming up with vaccines. I said in my previous video, I think there's more than 80 vaccines right now, but what the Department of Health and Human Services did was they picked 14 ideal vaccine candidates. So they picked 14 people to invest in, and they started investing them. In March, they invested over $485 million to Johnson & Johnson. So that's the Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer that got approved first. And then they gave a bunch of money, I think the same amount, to Moderna for their vaccine. And then it just went down from there. They just kept investing in people that were coming up with a vaccine so that they could go ahead and get it tested fast and safe. And then all meanwhile they were manufacturing them so that when they were finally approved for emergency reuse, there was no lag time, so they could just go ahead and distribute like right there, which is so smart. And I'm so excited that everyone was able to come together so that we see what we're seeing now, and that's the vaccines being distributed. So the reason that Operation Warp Speed has been so successful so far is that we were looking at a high virus burden. So we were looking at so many people being infected with this virus that it was absolutely necessary to speed things up, because it was very, very harmful for the world. And not only were they able to speed things up on the actual trial end, but they had FDA task force on standby to really analyze the data as it came in order to say, like, get that stamp of approval that it's safe and effective for distribution. So the overall mission of Operation Warp Speed was that their goal was to make sure that they had the doses available, at least the initial doses, by January 2021. And as we can already see, they're already on track. People have already received initial doses from December, so we're a month even ahead of schedule. So there's 3 major types of vaccines, and in my next video after this, I'm going to break down all those types and scientifically how it works in your body. So we have RNA based, that's number 1, and that's Pfizer and Moderna's take on the vaccine. And then we have viral vector based, so they're using a virus, in this case adenovirus, to distribute the vaccine in your body. And then we have the 3rd type of technology, and that is spike protein or protein based. And these 3 technologies are what are being used primarily right now to come up with these vaccines. And actually over 80 people have come up with different types of vaccines. There are different vaccines already approved for emergency use in the United States, UK, UAE, Russia, China, and they're all different companies that have produced these vaccines. I'm gonna show you an image here, but there's a good vaccine tracker that the New York Times is using to track all the different vaccines and what stage they're on in development, if they're approved for use, and all the different companies that are coming up with vaccines. I urge you to stay informed if you want to know like what's going on, and also if you can decide for yourself what kind of technology you want for your vaccine. I know the frontline workers can't really decide because they need protection now, but as a consumer, you're totally allowed to look at the technologies and see which one you would rather be vaccinated with. I hope you liked my little breakdown of Operation Warp Speed and what that means for the evaluation and approval of the vaccines that are coming through the pipeline for COVID. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about the different technologies that they're using in order to come up with a vaccine, and so you can be more in the loop about what you want to pick as a consumer to get vaccinated with. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it cleared a little bit of things up and you are more informed about Operation Warp Speed. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to make sure that you get to see my next videos, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.